Assalamu alaikum. I am Koma Zara, consultant insights at Oula. Oula is a market research agency in collaboration with Kantar, led by Noaman Asar. Noaman was associated with Kantar for the past 7 years and can be credited for a successful launch of Millward Brown in Pakistan. I recently read a very interesting thought piece written by Noaman, and that is what I'm here to discuss about. And I have here with me Mr. Noaman.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. How are you, Noaman?
Fine, thanks a lot. Doing great and really excited to share this thought piece on generation.
Even I am really excited to talk about it, and so we'll come straight to the point. That thought piece was basically about Gen Z. So why do you think we should even be discussing Gen Z?
I think for Pakistanis and for Pakistani marketeers, it's a very important topic. Given that Pakistan's population is a very young population, and about 60 to 65% of the population is below the age of 30, Gen Z makes up a very important portion of Pakistan. So about 30% of Pakistani population is made up of Gen Z. And therefore, understanding this population is very important because they're not only huge in population, but they're also entering the market right now. They're taking decisions in terms of consumption habits, etc. And therefore, understanding them, communicating to them, becoming relevant to them becomes very important for brands in Pakistan. And that's exactly why we thought of delving into this topic and thinking about how should we actually be addressing Gen Z in Pakistan.
You mentioned something about the brands and the association with Gen Z. So how do you think is Gen Z important segment for different brands?
So one, of course, is the size of the population. So they're 30% of Pakistan, and if we talk about active population in terms of economics, so people who are actively purchasing stuff and taking decisions on stuff, Gen Z makes up a huge population again. So if we take population from 18 and above in terms of age, and we start studying them, we see that from 18 to 25, which is Gen Z population, makes up about 25% of economically active population. And therefore, understanding them in terms of how to be meaningfully different to them, how to be able to cater to their needs becomes very important. If we will ignore them in Pakistan, we'll actually ignore a population that defines what the market is all about. And therefore, understanding Gen Z becomes very important, not only in terms of how we shape up our society as Pakistan, but also as marketeers, we really need to understand them so that we can cater to their needs, we can address their need states, and make our brands closer to their heart so that our consumers start sharing time with our brands.
Okay, so what is it that, like talking on the broader terms, what is it that makes Pakistan unique, having such a huge Gen Z population?
So one thing very exciting about Gen Z is that if you start looking at different countries, Pakistan is one of those 4 countries which has the biggest Gen Z population. So Nigeria, Pakistan, India, and Indonesia are the 4 countries which have huge Gen Z population. And even in these 4 countries, if you look at proportionately that which country has a bigger Gen Z population, Pakistan is the second. So Nigeria and Pakistan make up are countries which have huge Gen Z population. So that in itself makes Pakistan very unique from the rest of the world. Then, of course, the experiences that our Gen Z have gone through is very unique in itself, and therefore the way Gen Z is reacting in these times is very different from how many other countries have reacted to, say, COVID, how they've reacted to the economic pressures that the world is facing, and specifically Pakistan is facing. And that's why studying Gen Z, understanding them, becomes a very important, relevant, and exciting topic.
That's quite interesting. I would also like to know that what is it that obviously you did mention the experience that Gen Z has had, experience and all. It is making them very different. What is it that is specifically different when we are comparing them to the older generations?
Very good question. And frankly speaking, there are 3 or 4 very specific points that we should keep in mind, which makes Gen Z very different from the rest of the population. So one is, of course, they're very diversified. And sometimes as marketeers, what happens is that when we think of Gen Z, we start thinking of them in a very singular manner, which is we would assume that Gen Z is a student, single, and that's how we would like to define Gen Z, but that's not exactly what Gen Zs are all about. So if we start thinking of them, they're not really students. Only 20% of their population, and in urban areas, only 20% of their population are students. Basically, they're doing so. Another 80% would not like to classify themselves as students. Similarly, if we think of them that whether they're single or not, only 49% of them say that they're single. But as marketeers, what would happen is that when we'll be portraying a Gen Z population, we'll be portraying them as single, we'll be portraying them as students, and that in itself is a very gross misrepresentation. However, that does not mean that when we want to pick up, if we want to represent students in a communication, then of course Gen Z is the most relevant age group to represent. So if 20% of the population amongst Gen Z go to school or universities, compare that to the rest of the population, it would only come down to 9%. And therefore, yes, if you want to show students, then showing Gen Z in your commercials or in your communication is fine. But if you want to show Gen Z, then showing them as students is not the right representation of that population. So number one, diversity makes them very unique. Another thing that makes them very unique is the experiences that they've gone through, not only in terms of politics, but also in terms of economics, and also in terms of the experience that they have with the digital media overall.
So talking about digital media and economy, if we focus on the online shopping, which is becoming a trend mainly after COVID, what is it that the huge Gen Z population mean for online shopping?
It's good news, frankly speaking. So what's really happening is that it's the Gen Z population which is driving the online consumption in Pakistan. Indication of that is, of course, there's a very good piece that we as Kantar did in Pakistan, which is known as a barometer study, which actually measures how people have reacted to COVID in Pakistan. And what we noticed in that study is that when we asked them about that whether commercials or communications that were made before COVID and after COVID, so have the quality of communication deteriorated. And what we realize is that more of Gen Z say yes. So number one, yes. What's really happening is that they're a population which is difficult to please. But this is also a population that has reacted positively to the consumption habits. So if we see retail shopping in malls, online shopping, it has gone down for the rest of the population. However, when we see Gen Z, the online purchases have really gone up, and that's a good sign that if we want to continue in terms of growing the economy via consumption, online shopping is going to play a very important role, and Gen Z as a population is going to really drive that growth overall.
This is basically bringing so many questions in my mind, but holding on to the thing you said, is Gen Z bringing more opportunities for brands, or is it like making it more difficult for brands to cope up?
So they're really bringing in opportunities. So they are the future of the market. They are the ones who are going to use online platforms for purchases. However, it's also true that as brand managers, we're not prepared right now. And when I say prepared, what I mean is that we really don't understand Gen Z in a very good manner. And therefore, doing more research, diving more into the mindset that Gen Z has, and what makes them very unique is very important. So understanding Gen Z, getting their insights, understanding what triggers them, and what are their soft spots is very important. And only those brands will be able to take advantage of this opportunity, those who have a very good understanding of this population.
You also mentioned something previously about Gen Z being difficult to please. What is it that makes you say that?
So the data point that makes me say that is that what we're really noticing is that they're not responding to advertisements as positively as the rest of the population is, and that makes them difficult to please. Why are they difficult to please is because they have a very unique experience, as I mentioned earlier as well. And unfortunately, as marketeers, we're not really addressing that uniqueness of Gen Z. We're not addressing their soft spots. We're not addressing their need states. And therefore, we as a brand, I'm talking generally, not all of the brands, but a lot of our brands in Pakistan are not meaningful to our audience, which is basically Gen Z.
As you mentioned, there are only some brands that might struggle with Gen Z. What kind of product categories or services are more prone to struggle with Gen Z? If you just define the categories, maybe.
I mean, I would not like to put it in this sense that there's a particular category that will struggle. The way I'm putting it is that if a certain brand or category managers don't have a good understanding of Gen Z, they will really struggle. However, to answer your question directly, there are certain categories that will boom because of Gen Z. And those categories are fashion, apparel. Those are categories related to digital medium. Those are categories which are more active on the digital media, are the categories which are actually going to take advantage of the potential that Gen Z offers to us.
But I just saw this in your thought piece, and I thought we should be discussing about it. There's this rising trend of Metaverse. And you also mentioned it in the thought piece. So what is it what is your view about Metaverse? And also, how is it that different generations are interacting with Metaverse? Like, what is your opinion about it?
So Metaverse is a technology that actually has gained popularity after Facebook migrated to a new branding, which is Meta in itself. And it's become really a talk of town. But I think it is a reality that will shape up in the future. There are many people who are still not believing that it will happen. But looking at the trends last 40, 50 years, even internet, when internet was starting back in the 80s, many people thought that it would never really catch up. So what is Metaverse? Metaverse is basically Web 3.0, which takes advantage of augmented reality and like stuff. And therefore a totally new world is going to be created, which is going to be a virtual world where people will be able to interact with brands. They will be able to interact with games, and it would be very real to them overall. And I think that possesses a great opportunity for marketeers as well, because right now, if we think about video or TV communication, it's a very singular communication in the sense that we're only catering to the visual and the audio senses of our consumers. What Metaverse will also give advantage to is that it will start in a certain way communicating to our senses as well overall, and that's quite an exciting world, which I think Gen Z and younger population will adopt and adapt to very quickly, and therefore brands really need to gear up for it. So as the digital world is shaping up, marketeers also need to train themselves in terms of understanding this new world so that they are able to take advantage of it as soon as possible.
You're actually hinting great opportunities, growth opportunities for different brands. And if we be more specific, what is it that you would be like suggesting in terms of how should brands be approaching Gen Z?
Nice one. So this is a population which is the future of the economy. It's also a population which is very impatient. They want things quickly at their doorstep. And they are also involved with a lot of data is coming into their minds. And all of this together really makes them a population which is really an anxious population. Anxiety is quite high. And in terms of communicating to this kind of a population, it's very important that we are communicating in a very light manner. We don't make things very difficult for them. So whatever is being communicated to them comes through them in a system one way. When I say system one, what I really mean is that it's their quick thought process that is able to process them rather than they have to put in a lot of effort in terms of understanding. And for that, for marketeers, what I would advise is, number one, be meaningfully different to your audience and to your consumers. By meaningful, what I mean is that a lot of affinity really needs to be created. So love for the brand really needs to be created, but we should not forget that catering to that need state is also very important. Another advice that I would give is that this generation, Gen Z generation, are using multiple platforms or multiple screens. And just catering to them via one screen or couple of screens won't really matter. We need to be holistically be present on all the platforms that this population is present in. And the third thing that I would really highlight is that they really want to be influenced by influencers. By that, I don't mean that they like being influenced by celebrities, but by influencers. And why influencers? Because influencers are people like them. They're not different kind of a population. They're people like them, and therefore listening to them becomes much more credible for this population. So those are the three pieces of advice that I would actually give.
So you feel that they're going to be more connected to the influencers, considering that they're very close to the reality, more towards like they can relate to them.
Number one, that's very important that influencers are more relatable. But the other thing that we should also be aware of is that those influencers should be relevant to the product, brand, and category that we're talking about. So an influencer who is not relatable in a certain category should not be used. So those kinds of judgments still needs to be used by our professionals when they're communicating to this population.
I see that you're quite close to identifying and understanding the Gen Z, and that is why I thought this piece is very interesting. And it's not just interesting for me, and I am hoping that it will be also very, very interesting for our brands and for our audience. Thank you so much for your time. It was great speaking to you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.